generals could tell you how many planes they had, how many tons of bombs they dropped, or whatever the hell it was. But he was the only person that I knew in the senior command of the Air Force who focused solely on the loss of his crews per unit of target destruction. I was on the island of Guam in his command in March of 1945. In that single night, we burned to death 100,000 Japanese civilians in Tokyo, men, women, and children.
Were you aware this was going to happen?
Well, I was part of a mechanism that in a sense recommended it. Bombing operations and how to make them more efficient, i.e., not more efficient in the sense of killing more, but more efficient in weakening the adversary. I wrote one report analyzing the efficiency of the B-29 operations. The B-29 could get above the fighter aircraft, above the air defense, so the loss rate would be much less. The problem was, the accuracy was also much less. Now, I don't want to suggest that it was my report that led to, I'll call it, the firebombing. It isn't that I'm trying to absolve myself of blame for the firebombing. I don't want to suggest that it was I that put in LeMay's mind that his operations were totally inefficient and had to be drastically changed. But anyhow, that's what he did. He took the B-29s down to 5,000 feet, and he decided to bomb with firebombs. I participated in the interrogation of the B-29 bomber crews that came back that night. A room full of crewmen and intelligence interrogators. The captain got up, young captain, and said, "God damn it, I'd like to know who this son of a bitch was that took this magnificent airplane designed to bomb from 23,000 feet, and he took it down to 5,000 feet, and I lost my wingman. He was shot and killed." LeMay spoke in monosyllables. I never heard him say more than 2 words in sequence. It was basically yes, no, yep. That's all right, hell with it. That was all he said. And LeMay was totally intolerant of criticism. He never engaged in discussion with anybody. He stood up. Why are we here? Why are we here? You lost your wingman. It hurts me as much as it does you. I sent him there. And I've been there, I know what it is. But you lost one wingman and we destroyed Tokyo. It's 50 square miles of Tokyo were burned. Tokyo was a wooden city, and when we dropped these firebombs, and it just burned it.
choice of incendiary bombs, where did that come from?
I think the issue is not so much incendiary bombs. I think the issue is, in order to win a war, should you kill 100,000 people in one night by firebombing or any other way? LeMay's answer would be clearly yes. McNamara, do you mean to say that instead of killing 100,000, burning to death 100,000 Japanese civilians in that one night, we should have burned to death a lesser number or none, and then had our soldiers cross the beaches in Tokyo and been slaughtered in the tens of thousands? Is that what you're proposing? Is that moral? Is that wise? Why was it necessary to drop the nuclear bomb if LeMay was burning up Japan? And he went on from Tokyo.
Okay, this is the key question. Why drop a nuclear bomb if you're already bombing the hell out of Japan?
Tokyo to firebomb other cities. 58% of Yokohama. Yokohama is roughly the size of Cleveland. 58% of Cleveland destroyed. Tokyo is roughly the size of New York. 51% of New York destroyed. 99% of the equivalent of Chattanooga, which was Toyama. 40% of the equivalent of Los Angeles, which was Nagoya. This was all done before the dropping of the nuclear bomb, which, by the way, was dropped by LeMay's command. Proportionality should be a guideline in war. Killing 50 to 90% of the people of 67 Japanese cities and then bombing them with 2 nuclear bombs is not proportional, in the minds of some people, to the objectives we were trying to achieve. I don't fault Truman for dropping the nuclear bomb. The U.S.-Japanese War was one of the most brutal wars in all of human history. Kamikaze pilots, suicide, unbelievable. What one can criticize is that the human race prior to that time and today has not really grappled with what are, I'll call it, the rules of war. Was there a rule, Len, that said you shouldn't bomb, shouldn't kill, shouldn't burn to death 100,000 civilians in a night? LeMay said if we'd lost the war, we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals. And I think he's right. He, and I'd say I, were behaving as war criminals. LeMay recognized that what he was doing would be thought immoral if his side had lost. But what makes it immoral if you lose and not immoral if you win?
This right here represents the next piece of the puzzle, which is clearly McNamara's argument is, and the thing that most people don't realize, that we were killing a lot more civilians before we dropped the nuclear bombs. Now, does that justify the nuclear bombs? I'm not saying that it does, but it clearly had the shock and awe effect that kept us from having to drop more firebombs. So are we talking about choosing between lesser evils in this case? Probably, right? I mean, McNamara himself refers to himself as probably a war criminal, right? That's a pretty big confession. But what happens after the war is critically important. And we defeat Japan, right? They give up after this, but now we have something that we didn't have before, a nuclear weapon. And what happens, those of you, I'm not sure if this is like an HR question where I get fired if I ask it, so I won't ask it to anyone specific, but I was gonna say, who has kids, but I'm going to say, if you have kids, right, or if you've seen kids recently, I want you to think about this. The last time you saw a kid who got like a new toy and his brothers and sisters were nearby, right? What happens? Okay, or a candy bar or something. Jealousy, violence, we're going to take that thing, right? Okay, so we have a nuclear weapon. We have nuclear weapons, and we also have, at this point, an enemy. Because the guy, we've won in Europe, but we pushed from the west to the east, and Russia pushed from the east to the west, and we met and we divided Germany right down the middle, and Russia, the Soviet Union, then controlled everything from that point all the way over to right up there, controlled this huge, vast area, half of Europe, right? All of Russia, all of the stands, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all those countries in there, all that territory. And this was, we felt, our real enemy at this point. As soon as the war is over, these guys become our enemy, communism, right? Because it is, in many respects, fundamentally opposed to the principles that our country is founded on. Capitalism, freedom of choice, liberties, right, that are inherent in the human being, rather than issues of sort of forced equality, a dictatorial government. And Joseph Stalin was in charge of the Soviet Union. We've talked about him before. But what we didn't think about, the United States, again, was pretty sure that we had plenty of time where we would be the only ones who controlled nuclear weapons. But Joseph Stalin was, I'm going to just put it out there, much better at us when it came to spying, right? When it came to spying, he was a genius. And he already had a ton of intelligence by the time we dropped the bombs in Japan about what we were doing with the Manhattan Project. And within 5 years, he has his own nuclear weapons, right? And now everything gets weird because we have nuclear weapons, the Soviet Union has nuclear weapons, and he dumped so much money into developing those nuclear weapons, so many resources, slave labor, into developing his nuclear weapons. But he did it. Within 5 years, the Soviet Union was on the same playing ground as we were, and then we begin this arms race, right? Where we start trying to develop more powerful weapons. We develop them first, but Russia's right behind us, developing other sorts of weapons. And we're in this big race, right? We're chasing after each other. And we develop and move into a strategy that gets a fun and very accurate acronym. It is mutually assured destruction, MAD, right? The idea was that we eventually reach a point where we go, look, if I attack you, then you will fire your nuclear missiles. And then I will fire my nuclear missiles at the point where we develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, missiles that can carry a nuclear weapon to a target on the other side of the planet. Once we reach that point, if one of us does anything, then we all die, right? We destroy, the United States is destroyed, and the Soviet Union is destroyed. And we have enough weapons to do that. So then how do we fight a war against an enemy when if we fight them, we all die? And the answer is that we do it through proxy wars. We do it by trying to contain them. These set of dominoes right here, I'm not sure that people even know what dominoes anymore are, but that's what those are. These are dominoes, right? And the idea was this idea called the domino effect. I'll play it out right here, which was this fear that if communism were allowed to spread, it would, like if you knock over that top domino, it would just keep spreading. Feels dramatic, right? Yeah. It would just keep spreading. And so what we tried to do was not fight the Soviet Union, but prevent communism from spreading to other countries. And so we would have these proxy wars where the Soviet Union would give resources to somebody, and then we would give resources to the other side in that country and try and see who could win in this battle. Unfortunately for us, things moved very swiftly in favor of communism. One that we didn't really expect was in China. China, who had been our ally that we had helped liberate, turns communist very shortly after this. About the same time that Russia is developing nuclear weapons, China, this huge nation, becomes a communist nation. Korea had been divided along what's called the 38th parallel, which is what divides North and South Korea. And it was meant to be controlled in a, here we go. It was meant that there was a lot of mediated territory that was supposed to be controlled. And so like Korea, we decided the Soviets, yeah, it's fine. Okay, the northern part, you guys kind of have a sphere of influence there. We have a sphere of influence in the south. And we also developed a program called the Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan, write it down. Okay, Marshall Plan, which was because we looked at everything that went badly that helped to cause World War II, right? The economic conditions that allowed Mussolini to rise to power in Italy, the conditions, also looking at the Cold War, the conditions that allowed Lenin to rise to power in Russia, the conditions that allowed Hitler to rise to power in Germany. And we said, those countries were desperate, they were poor, they were in terrible state, and so rather than us go and punish our enemies when we get done, we're going to rebuild them. And so we invested resources into rebuilding Japan, rebuilding their economy, making them a strong ally, which they are to this day, right? One of our most important allies as a nation. Instead of creating this like permanent animosity and hatred between the two countries, we are going to make an ally out of them by helping to rebuild them. We do the same thing in Europe. These two things meet together in interesting ways. I'm going to give you one example. So I have a son. His name is Dean. And so Dean is named after my great-uncle Dean. And my great-uncle Dean went to work for the Roosevelt administration, and he was in the Farm Security Administration. So all he was supposed to be doing was helping farmers in America get the loans that they needed. Okay? But then World War II happens, and he happens to have been working in this economic development sort of thing, right? Helping farmers rebuild their lives. And so after World War II, he is made part of the administration that administers the Marshall Plan. He goes to Germany. He was, sorry, I get emotional with this story. He goes to Germany. He is one of the first people inside some of the concentration camps, getting aid to recently liberated Holocaust victims from concentration camps in Germany. He told my dad was very close with him. He told my dad right before he died that there was one time that he was, you have to remember he's not a soldier, he's a civilian. And he was in a Jeep and he was headed through this area kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And he gets to this spot where the war, that's like, it's just out in the middle of nowhere. And there are these SS officers, these Nazi officers marching this whole village out at machine gun point, like they're going to just slaughter them. And the war is over, right? But in this little corner of Germany that nobody has really gotten to yet, the word hasn't gotten out there or they're still fighting it. And so he sees these guys and he makes the decision that he has to stand up and use the 50 caliber machine gun on the Jeep to kill these SS officers, right? He saw and did a number of things. He was a Latter-day Saint. He was Mormon, and so the church, the LDS Church, had him in charge of a lot of the administration of their charity aid that was sent over to Europe. And then he was sent to Korea to help administer. He was part of the Joint Commission that was supposed to help with the Marshall Plan and keeping the peace in Korea. Now, Why do I get emotional about this story? There's another thing going on with this whole fear of communism, that's called the Red Scare. The Red Scare, so red is the color we associate with communism. If you go and look at the Soviet Union, the Russian flag or the Chinese flag, you see a lot of red, right? That's the color of communism. And so there was what was called the Red Scare. There was a guy named Joseph McCarthy who had chaired a committee in Congress called the House Un-American Activities Committee. And this committee's job was to go and try and hunt down communists who were hiding inside the United States. And there were a lot of famous cases of them going after academics, going after people in Hollywood. And being accused of being a communist was enough to basically ruin your career wherever you were at. So my great uncle Dean was there. He was there when the Korean War started. He was assisting in organizing efforts during the Korean War. He was also in the middle of a fight with his wife back here in Utah. And she, in order to get back at him, went and very publicly joined the Communist Party. My uncle was immediately fired. He was sent back to the United States, and he wound up managing an apartment property until he died when he was about 80. And so he went from this guy who had helped in helping people in concentration camps and rebuilding Germany to having his whole career destroyed because his wife was a little crazy and decided to get back at him in a really severe way. That's how seriously we took communism and how frenzied we became about trying to stop it at any cost during this time period. The Korean War is interesting in part because the war breaks out. Douglas MacArthur, General MacArthur, is the one who is really sort of in charge. He is told to push back the Koreans, the North Koreans, to the 38th parallel, which he does very successfully, and I give him credit for that. And so did my great uncle Dean. But then my great uncle Dean liked to swear about this guy a lot. He then decides to just keep going, right? And so he pushes the North Koreans back until he gets almost to the Chinese border. And then all of a sudden, 100,000 Chinese soldiers come streaming over the border, and we get bogged down in a war. A war that could have been done in a couple of weeks instead lasts years, right? Because he disobeyed the order that he was given by his commander-in-chief, Truman, to just push them back to a certain point. So he keeps going, and we get bogged down in our first real war of the Cold War, right? It's called the Cold War because there's no hot fighting with Russia, but at the same time, thousands and thousands of American lives were lost throughout the conflicts that were associated with this Cold War. Somebody's calling me. I don't know who it is. Okay, so the battle is very complex. In the end, the Korean War is resolved by us basically being in exactly the same spot that Truman wanted us to be at the beginning, which was we wound up at the 38th parallel, and we've stayed there ever since, right? We have North Korea and South Korea, so we fought this entire war in order to get back to where we were in the beginning, back when my great uncle Dean showed up in Korea. Eventually, everything's halted, and things move forward. Mao Zedong, I'm going to talk about him for just a second. Why did China turn communist when we had been their ally? It came down to moments of somebody being pretty brilliant. And Mao, who goes on the list, right, with Stalin and Hitler as probably one of the most evil people who ever lived, was also a genius in terms of warfare. The leader of China, who had been our ally during World War II, was Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek, after the war, decides, hey, I think I can really just get rid of these communist rebels who have been giving me trouble. And so he decides to chase after Mao, who is head of these communist rebels in the country. And Mao goes on what's called the Long March. And he takes his troops and he just marches all over China, back and forth, thousands of miles, while Chiang Kai-shek chases after him. But this is the mistake that he makes. And I want you to pay attention to this because you're going to see these sorts of mistakes throughout the rest of the Cold War. Mao would go into a village as he's marching his Red Army across China. And when he would go in there, he would hold a trial. He would go and he would take the local land warlord who kind of controlled that area, put him on trial, throw him in prison, tell all the farmers, hey, you've all got, I'm going to divide up his land and you all get an equal piece of it. And this is what the socialist paradise looks like. Congratulations, you've been liberated. Leaves town. Chiang Kai-shek shows up 2 days later with his army. What happened here? Puts everything back in order, keeps chasing after Mao, right? Okay, so when he leaves, who do the people affiliate with? Who do they like? This guy right here, right? Mao. And so by the time after chasing Mao all over the country, the entire country loves Mao. And that's how he just sort of overnight, boom, he is able to take over the country very successfully. Chiang Kai-shek flees to Taiwan. That's where we wind up with that divide between China and Taiwan. Okay, we are about out of time. Let's do real quickly the old school participation thing. So just real quickly, chunk of paper, put your name on it, pass those forward. Next time we're going to talk about Vietnam. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Yeah, you can put more than one name on a piece of paper. So if your Rose just going to use one piece of paper or whatever, that'll simplify our lives too. What's that?
We're done, or have you got more that was going on?
I was just going to say a couple of things, but we'll see if I'm successful. You never know what happens. Okay, so next time we're going to talk about Vietnam. We're going to do no kind of justice to Vietnam in a single day. So I may carry it over a little bit to next week. But we're going to talk about it, cover these key issues, and begin to tie what happened then to today.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
I was unable to attend anything on Saturday because I had
Yep.
to kind of urgently go out of town.
Yep.
So is there any way to make up those points that were kind of lost?